So here I have a curve object that's being transformed into this fence, this thatch fence on this property that I'm trying to model. And I'm realizing this ground isn't actually properly flat. Instead, what the ground looks like is more like this. Let me turn this to solid view, but you can see the shadows and you can see that the fence isn't properly aligned. At the top here, it's going into the ground a little bit. And here it's floating above the ground a little bit. So what we can do, or try to do, is take our fence and apply a shrink wrap with the target as the new ground. And you can see it hasn't really done what we want it to do because it shrink wrapped the curve after the geometry node modifier is applied. And if we try to change the order here, then we have this error, input geometry has unsupported type mesh, because the shrink wrap modifier is converting from a curve to a mesh. So instead, what we can do is set up our own geometry node workflow. And I already have one set up. Called shrink wrap curve. And I'll go through it and explain it. First, I have to set the target geometry again, similar to the shrink wrap modifier, and apply it before my thatch fence geometry node. And here we go. We can see, especially if we go into render view, we don't really have these big gaps. We do have some issues here, but that's because the ground geometry normals aren't set correctly, I believe. Either that or it's an issue with my fence geometry node setup. But let me go through and explain what all these points, or each of these nodes, are doing. So first we have the resample curve, because we have our curve points and their handles, but say we want way more than that so that we get a good resolution for where we want to shrink wrap all of the points of our curve to the base mesh. So we can change the number of points. I have this set to count, so you can select exactly how many points. And because I've connected it to the Greep input node, it's over here on this right panel. So I can set this to 20. You won't see any difference here, but you will see the fence might be, the fence and the curve that underlines this fence might attach to the ground plane a little bit better. Sample index is taking the position of each of these points along the curve and bringing it to the geometry proximity node. This is what's doing the heavy lifting here, because it's saying take our target geometry of the target mesh, which is this ground plane, and for every position of our curves, the points of our curve, find the closest face on the target geometry. So if I move into solid view, you should be able to see that because this ground mesh was made with Dino-Topo, we have quite a bit of resolution, but we can say here is a face, and here is a face, here is a face. Find the closest face, so that could even be like right here. It doesn't have to be the center of the face. And that point will now, or that index, I should say, will now know, stop holding D, will now know that position. It'll have stored it. And then that position can be sent to reset this position of this point. And so it'll be moved here. So that's like shrink wrap. You're taking a position of the curve and you're moving it to a different position, and that just gets sent back into the group output. Hopefully that's helpful. It might be pretty specific to what my setup is like, that I have another geometry node set up after this. Otherwise, you might not be worried that you're just using the shrink wrap modifier and converting your curve to a mesh. But if you have some other operation afterwards that you need to maintain that curve, that could be helpful. Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.